Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. No, not like that. No, not that either. Don't you know what a metaphor is? Metonymy? Metaphor? William Shakespeare is widely considered to be one of the greatest writers of the English language. He's credited with writing 37 plays and 154 sonnets, and he's the second most quoted English writer after the writers of the Bible. But why is Shakespeare so important to us? Why is he considered to be one of the greatest writers of the English language? Why do we keep reading him years and years and years after his death? That's exactly what we're here to talk to you about. We want to explain exactly why Shakespeare is as wondrous as he is, and we hope that you can appreciate him just as much as we do. Shakespeare was baptized on April 26, 1564. We don't actually know the date of his birth, but we kind of assume that it would have been a few days before then, and so we assume that it was April 23rd, 1564. Shakespeare was born to parents John and Mary Shakespeare in Stratford-upon-Avon, Warwickshire, England. Although we don't know very much at all about his childhood, he probably would have attended the local grammar school where he would have learned Latin and Greek and studied the Roman dramatists. In 1582, he married Anne Hathaway. No, not that Anne Hathaway. They had 3 children. We don't know exactly what made Shakespeare decide to go to London and join the theatre, nor do we really have any idea of exactly when he went. Darling, I'm off to London.
But William, what do you plan to do in London?
I shall become a playwright.
A playwright?
Not just any playwright, the greatest English playwright who ever lived.
William, you don't need to go to London. On the Wilder stage, all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. One man in his time plays many parts.
Hey, that's good. Do you mind if I use that?
Oh Lord, what fools these mortals be. Be realistic, William. Why don't you pursue engineering or chemical biology or something actually useful?
This is art, Anne. You wouldn't understand. The first written evidence that we have of Shakespeare being in London was in 1592. Robert Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit mentions vaguely Shakespeare and gives us an idea that at the time Shakespeare had become fairly popular as a writer for several different companies in London. Shakespeare joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men in 1594 when they formed, and he stayed with them until 1603 when they became known as the King's Men when James I took the throne. Shakespeare, along with many other members of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, was actually instrumental in building the Globe Theatre in London, which burned down in 1613 and was rebuilt again in 1614. In addition to being a playwright, Shakespeare also seems to have been a handyman as well as an actor around the theatre. He didn't play any principal roles in any of his plays, but he did seem to have played some smaller roles, such as the Ghost in Hamlet. Shakespeare died on April 23rd of 1616, and he's buried in the Stratford-upon-Avon churchyard. In 1623, Hemmings and Condell got together 36 of Shakespeare's plays and published what's known as the First Folio. Though Shakespeare's works had been published in various forms and quartos over the years, the First Folio is widely considered one of the best editions of Shakespeare's work that we have. The way that most of these quartos that were published before the folio were compiled is that an actor would memorize as much of the play as they could, and then they would recite it as well as they could to a printer who would then print and distribute the plays. Unfortunately, this resulted in some very corrupted as well as just some bad editions of Shakespeare's play. One question that's come up since Shakespeare's death is an interesting one. Did Shakespeare write Shakespeare? Most scholars seem to think that he did, but there are several that aren't quite so sure. Most of these scholars fall into 2 camps, those who think that Francis Bacon wrote Shakespeare's plays, and those who think that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, wrote them. These people don't seem to think that William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon could have written the plays that are attributed to him because he lacked the education, the imagination, and the status to write what is widely considered to be some of the greatest works in the English language. Unfortunately for these people, most of the evidence from Shakespeare's time suggests that he did, in fact, write the plays that we attribute to him today.
Historicists read literature in respect to history, so it's valuable to know what was going on in the world during Shakespeare's time. In England, when Shakespeare was alive, the monarchy and the church were the 2 centers of daily life, and both were undergoing massive upheaval right before his birth and during his life. After the death of King Henry VIII in 1547, in the space of 10 years, the throne passed between his son Edward, Lady Jane Grey, Mary I, to Elizabeth I. Shakespeare was born early in the reign of Elizabeth I. While the throne was changing hands very rapidly, the religion of England was also ping-ponging back and forth. Henry VIII broke ties with the Catholic Church and made himself head of the Church of England. After his death, his first daughter, Mary, took the throne and sought to restore Catholicism as the religion of England. In doing so, she was a bit overzealous and earned herself the title Bloody Mary. The growing anxiety over who's running the country is reflected in some of Shakespeare's work, like Hamlet or King John. After Mary's death, Queen Elizabeth switched the country back to the Protestant church. However, she still had to contend with some factions that didn't want her to be queen. They wanted a Catholic queen instead, so they sought to bring Mary, Queen of Scots, to the throne. To avoid being overthrown, she actually had to have her cousin Mary arrested and beheaded in 1587. This was a very worrying thing for many people, both noble and commoner of the time, because monarchs ruled what's known as the divine right to rule, which meant that they were ruling because God put them there. So if one of God's chosen overthrows and beheads another one of God's chosen, it looks kind of bad. The 40-year reign of Queen Elizabeth I is considered England's golden age. It was a time of relative peace and prosperity, including the glorious defeat of the Spanish Armada. Elizabeth never married, so she didn't leave an heir to take the throne after she died. James I, her cousin, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, took the throne in 1603, which united Scotland and England under the same throne. When King James took the throne after Elizabeth's death in 1603, William Shakespeare had a new patron to impress. William Shakespeare wrote Macbeth for King James I, who'd been King of Scotland before ascending to the throne in England. His ancestor Banquo was presented in the play in an excellent light. During Shakespeare's time, the theater was a very popular pastime of both commoners and nobles. However, as the influence of Puritanism grew, the theater became more problematic. The Puritans didn't like the theater because they thought it was immoral and encouraged unholy behavior in the viewers. It was also dirty and a breeding ground for plague. In fact, around 1592, when Shakespeare was first getting established, there was a little bug going around called the bubonic plague that caused the closure of theaters across London. During this time, Shakespeare had a chance to work on his non-dramatic works, such as the poems that he wrote for the Earl of Southampton in 1593 and 1594, called Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. These became his first published written works. The theaters reopened in 1594. Even after worries about the spread of the plague abated, being an actor or playwright were still not considered honorable professions. As dishonorable as it was for a man to be an actor, it was forbidden for a woman to be an actor. None of the female characters in Shakespeare's plays were portrayed by women. Instead, they were portrayed by young boys who were dressed as women. Their higher-pitched voices made them ideal to play the female parts. Though the Puritans wanted to suppress the importance of the theater in social life, the monarchs during Shakespeare's time, Elizabeth I and James I, really enjoyed the theater, so they proved powerful patrons. They were able to preserve the tradition of the English theater despite the growing influence of the Puritans. All these factors combined had noticeable impact on Shakespeare's works. With these historical contexts in mind, we can read more deeply into what Shakespeare wrote.
What are you doing?
I'm trying to contact the ghost of Shakespeare.
Why?
I need him to tell me what this play means.
Buttocks.
Oh look, it works!
We don't actually need Shakespeare in order to interpret Shakespeare's plays. The consideration of what an author meant or intended in their work is called authorial intent, and when we talk about literature, it's not really all that important. In the words of John Green, books belong to their readers, and it's the reader's interpretation that counts. But that doesn't mean that any opinion about a work is as valid as any other opinion. When we talk about literature, our opinions and our interpretations of the work need to be based in the text itself. Our thoughts and opinions on a text are only valid if the text can support those thoughts and opinions. Luckily, text doesn't have just one meaning, and most texts can support a variety of interpretations. But at the end of the day, the author's thoughts or the reader's thoughts are only valid if they can come from the text itself. We'll be talking a lot more about things like authorial intent and reader interpretation in our next episode when we'll be talking about literary criticism. So we'll see you next time on Exit Pursued by a Bard.